everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was me playing the piano, by the way, virtually. Today's going to be an exciting show. I always love doing these kind of themed shows, if you will. So today we're talking about the history of video conferencing. And it could not be a better time in the industry to talk about it because things are just changing way too fast. And things are just changing every single day. You'd be surprised of what is going on in this industry. So we're going to talk about a brief history of video conferencing. And to help me do that, I have invited Chuck MacDonald, the video conferencing technology specialist from Jenne Distributing. Thank you so much for being here, Chuck. We'll be interviewing you soon. And hopefully, Daryl Hutchinson, CEO of Ubiety, although it looks like he's not here yet. I know he's on vacation.
Oh,
so.
yeah. I just saw it.
You just arrived. Thank you for so he's here.
How's it going?
Thank you. All right, great. So we've got both of them. Before we start, I wanted to talk a little bit about our donation program. Next week, we're donating $10,000 to the Susquehanna Valley CASA. That's a court-appointed special advocates program. And for those of you who have been following, you know that if you like this video, you will add $1 to our donation every single week. And we've upped our donations from $50 to $250 a week, but we have to hit our $50 max in order to do those matching donations. This week we've decided to donate to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They have having a really tough time right now with a flooding over there, and we wanted to help them out as well. So here's our charity donation log. As you can see, we just did $10,000 to the Susquehanna Valley CASA, and each week we've been doing it in the neighborhood of $50, and now we've got a new matching where hopefully we'll be getting up to $250. So a total of $10,146 this year to date for charity. So go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you tweet it out or like us on Facebook, it will also equal another dollar. So it's a very easy way to donate to charity. So today we're talking about an industry that I'm really saying it's on fire. This industry has gone crazy, and I even have a little slide here for this. Industry on fire. It's going crazy. We all know it. And the question I want to pose to Daryl and to Chuck today is, where are we in this industry? Is it still in the early majority, or is the majority of the world jumping on board with video conferencing? This is a bell curve, a traditional bell curve. I show this slide a lot. And it kind of says, is it still the early majority? Is it just innovators still, back in the days of Skype? Or have we really come into a time where the majority of businesses are using this technology? So that's how I want to kind of to start off this conversation. And Daryl, sorry, I thought you weren't there. You joined in the last second. How you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Yeah, on vacation and have two kids running around, so it's pretty hard to get away. So I apologize, but I managed to make it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And Chuck, do you want to first introduce yourself, and then we'll let Daryl introduce himself and what he does?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Chuck MacDonald. As Paul mentioned, I work for Jenne Distributing and their sales engineer for the video conferencing, and I've had my own history of video conferencing, so I'd be glad to speak to it today. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And Daryl, you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. I'm Daryl Hutchinson. I'm the CEO of Collaboration Squared. We're a global conferencing and collaboration service provider. And our most recent product is called Ubiety, which is powered by the Acano technology, and which is obviously now Cisco and Cisco Meeting Server. But yeah, interesting about our history is that we've been in the collaboration space for 7 years in this business, but many more before that as well. But mostly around the audio and web conferencing. So, for us, video conferencing and video collaboration is new in the last couple of years. And, when we talk about adoption, I think we are definitely moving into that world of mass adoption of video, and hence why we shifted and moved our business model that way, because, we can see that coming as the next phase.
Great. So Chuck, let me let you kind of start this off. We're talking about adoption, right? Video conferencing adoption, and I actually have like a little history chart here, which I was going to go over, and it kind of starts with the start of the internet, right? So the internet started, they say, in the 70s. I don't know if that's true or not. It obviously didn't become apparently usable until the 90s for video conferencing. And you can see as I kind of go down this history chart, in the 80s, I would say, and Chuck, I'm sure you could speak to this better than I can, it was really mainly audio conferencing was when you were doing collaboration, really over the telephone. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, there was video conferencing, I think, way back even in the 60s, but it really started gaining a little bit more momentum in the 90s and early 2000s. You had, going over H.320 over telephone lines, and then when the availability of broadband internet became available to most people, then you saw, the H.323, the video conferencing that we really see today, and even whether it be the different brands out there, or even Skype for consumer models like Skype and Google Hangouts.
So you mentioned H.323, and I think that's an important kind of segue to before we start talking about cloud-based conferencing. So Polycom, I know, and Cisco were kind of like the leaders in the very early days, but there's still even H.323 and SIP devices being used today. In fact, I think you're calling in on a H.323 device, correct?
Yeah, this happens to be a Yealink. They're relatively new to the market, but they've come out with their own line of video conferencing room systems. But yeah, back in the again, I'm dating myself a little bit, but back in the late 90s and early 2000s, these systems that we're using today were $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 each. So just even that price point was a barrier to entry, not to mention the whole infrastructure and the cost of lines back then. But then when Polycom, and it was actually Tandberg before Cisco acquired them, which was a big deal. The appliance-based video conferencing lowered the cost, and so you saw more adoption by companies and organizations, healthcare, education. But the cost was still pretty high and didn't allow for mass adoption. So now, again, moving forward, we're seeing more adoption because the price point of the equipment and the infrastructure has come down.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that H.323 and SIP is something that a lot of people might not ever really know about. Let's say they're just using Skype or just using GoToMeeting, and they don't even ever even heard of that term. And why don't I kind of segue over to Daryl? As you can see, I'm kind of going down this timeline. We reached kind of the 90s here when Windows 95 came out. And Daryl, before we keep getting into the new stuff, let's just stay in the 90s for a little bit. What did Windows 95 do to the landscape? And, as we talk about Windows 2000 and how like just the ability to have a computer with, a fast computer in general, when did video conferencing, do you think it kind of started rolling, would you say, Daryl?
I guess there's two paths of video conferencing. There's the business collaboration path, and then there's the consumer path, isn't there? And obviously when computers first came out in the early 90s and started having dial-up modems, that's not clearly a channel that can do video conferencing well. 64 kilobits a second on a modem is not what you want to do. So it wasn't until 2003 when Skype was born. And people's internets were getting a bit faster, that the reality of consumer-based video conferencing was a reality. Obviously, before that, you had in the 80s, obviously going into the 90s, you had the ISDN for business, so they could kind of get some consistency, maxing out at 384K to get a half decent signal. But that was very exclusive to board members and management to management meetings. And again, for me, the interesting thing about adoption is that, what's happened over the last 10 years is that people in their consumer lives have got this rich video conferencing experience on their personal devices and whether it be mobile devices or laptops. And they're now coming into the business demanding that. Whereas before, again, it was exclusively to the executive team and everybody else had to do phone and web conferencing. That's basically how it went. But again, the last 5 years, I'd say that there's a pretty dramatic shift where it's moving into everybody can do video collaboration in business as well as consumer.
Cool. So I just want to, just because we are talking about the history here, it looks like the very first webcam came out in 1998. So things were changing. 2003 was when Skype was first announced. I'm just going to keep going down here to show a couple of these more things here. Logitech actually in July 25th, I believe that's in 2003, released their first pan-tilt zoom camera. So I think they were on the right track there. GoToMeeting in 2004. So GoToMeeting is actually the second largest video conferencing software after Skype, and GoToMeeting just merged with Logman. I don't know if you knew that. But they've been in the industry for a long time, and that's why they're so big. Not necessarily because they're so good, but look at how long they've been in the industry. Phoenix.
To clarify, they were very much web conferencing back then. So there wasn't ability to introduce a webcam. It was just content sharing. The webcam feature in GoToMeeting and the likes of WebEx, didn't come till quite some time after that.
Interesting. I didn't even think of that. You think it's like what you would think of today, but you're right. Really reaching back there. Life Size came out, and of course they were a hardware company. Now they're just cloud. That was 2006. And just to put things in perspective, in 2007 was the first iPhone, right? So that literally brought video conferencing capabilities into the hands of millions of consumers. And I feel like that was a major shift. And I don't know if, Chuck, maybe you could talk about these kind of like paradigm shifts where, and you mentioned it, Daryl, where people are having better video conferencing experiences with consumer products than they are with business products. And it seems backwards. But how did the iPhone really, and smartphones in general, do you think really change the industry?
Well, with the availability of iPhones and the ease of connecting to people, I mean, Apple made it easy, right? One push of a button and you can be talking to grandma across the country doing FaceTime. Those are the kinds of things now that the kids of then and today, as they grow into the workplace, are going to expect video because they grew up with it, and they're going to probably say, why are we talking on the phone? Because we should be doing this over video. And the ease of use of the consumer products is pushing those video conferencing vendors on the commercial space to make it easier. And that's where those cloud platforms, one click to join, those kinds of things, you need to make it easy, just like it is for the kids of then and today use on their iPhones and their PCs at home.
Yeah, and here's the iPad here coming out in 2010. And Daryl, you really did answer this question. You kind of brought this up yourself. What are your thoughts on like the consumer side of the business, kind of reaching in, and take it anywhere you want here?
Yeah, so again, I mean, obviously Skype were the early pioneers in 2003, and obviously that was mostly kind of PC-based at the time, alongside AOL chat and things like that. But yeah, again, it's that big adoption that happened in the last 5 years, I think, really. And interestingly, the iPhone was brought out in 2007, but it wasn't until 2010 it had a webcam on it, on the back, on the front, sorry. So yeah, so FaceTime was launched in 2010, and that's when they could do consumer calls, and like Chuck mentioned, that really changed the game because trying to get your grandma to set them up with Skype could sometimes be complex. But if they had an iPhone or an iPad and it literally rings their iPad on FaceTime because it's kind of built into the OS, that made a big difference. So
let's segue in. We've only got 20 minutes here. Let's talk about, and both of you guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Microsoft Lync. It's such a big player in the industry because we've talked about consumer, demand driving business demand, and the kings of the business world, I feel like, are Cisco, Cisco Spark, and then you've got Microsoft and Microsoft Lync. Tell me a little bit about how this all happened and the challenges. Just tell me your thoughts on Microsoft Lync. Why don't you start, Daryl, and we'll let Chuck answer.
I mean, it's a massive player. It's important to our story of what we're doing today. But yeah, again, I mean, the interesting thing about most video conferencing apps on the consumer world is that they're always communicate from themselves to themselves. So FaceTime to FaceTime, Skype to Skype, link to link. There was no way to kind of move anything else outside of that. And that's obviously been true of Microsoft Link and Skype Business for some time. And then you had the legacy video conference endpoints that are out there in the meeting rooms, and then the new kind of PC-based rooms that use your cameras for meeting rooms and things like that, using USB. For me, it's how do you kind of get them all merging and working together? And Microsoft Link again has been in its own world to a certain extent. They opened out some interoperability, which then vendors like us then can kind of fill the gaps to bring it to the rest of the world. But Microsoft is a force to be reckoned with, as is Cisco, and again, it's about kind of making all the worlds working together. I think is where the future lies, and what the next step of the evolution needs to be. So hopefully we'll see that on your chart in a few years' time.
So what do you think, Chuck? I mean, as far as like what we've been talking about here with the enterprise level video conferencing, unified communications, it seems to be a somewhat of a new thing. I've never worked in a giant enterprise myself. I always worked in small businesses, so I never really got that experience. I've played around with it. Tell us a little bit about these types of solutions.
Well, like we talked about before, in the evolution of video conferencing, it started out very expensive, only maybe in one executive boardroom. As the price came down, there's a little bit more proliferation of video conferencing throughout the organization. What Skype for Business does is helps put that capability on everyone's desktop. So then you have a full enterprise video enabled. Again, there's some challenges with Skype for Business and the interoperability with some of the legacy equipment, but some of those things are being bridged with some of the vendors out there. So I think Microsoft, obviously, they have a very strong presence in the enterprise on the application side. Skype for Business, Link in the UC side, and they're also now in the video space and have a good presence in the market. So to Daryl's point, they're a force to be reckoned with for sure. Well, I think we've said that video conferencing is definitely here to stay. It's going to be expected more and more in the market by employees and companies and organizations, healthcare. A lot of savings is being taken advantage of with telemedicine. So there's a lot of wonderful things that video conferencing can do. So that is only going to keep growing. What we're seeing now with the evolution of more cloud vendors is that it takes, some of the infrastructure that has been very, very costly in the past, and makes it more affordable for small to medium to even large enterprises to continue to grow their video conferencing, because that very expensive infrastructure is now in the cloud, and it becomes more of a OpEx versus a huge capital expense.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that makes sense to me. Sorry for everyone. My audio did go down a second. I'm using a hub, and I don't know what's going on with that. But it should have only gone down for a second there. And then Daryl, same question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the future, I certainly hope it's bright. I hope it's in high definition, obviously. So I think, as internet around the world becomes better and faster, the quality issues will go away and pass. So that's great. But yeah, for me, the big thing I want to see is interoperability and openness across vendors. I mean, it seems like people try to build walled gardens, and that's not great. And even if you look at Google Duo that was launched just last week, it's a completely independent app that only talks from itself to itself again. And we should have moved on from that. So yeah, I believe openness from all the vendors and interoperability, being the kind of key, and just again seeing video pervasive, which I think it's starting to happen.
Okay, great. Well, guys, if you don't mind, we have a bunch of people watching the chat. I want to allow them to ask questions at this point, so I'm going to roll the credits, and then we'll open up to question and answers.
Great.